From a young age, Freya stood out among the children of her village, located in a valley surrounded by mountains and rivers of icy water. Her green eyes reflected the serenity of the fields that surrounded her, while her adventurous spirit clashed with the calm of the place. The daughter of a blacksmith and a healer, she grew up amidst the sound of hammering iron and the aroma of medicinal herbs. At just 6 years old, she was already helping her mother prepare infusions and ointments, while listening to the epic stories told by the elders around the campfire. As a teenager, Freya began to wonder about the world beyond the mountains. Curious and fearless, she would often climb the peaks near the village to observe the horizon. It was during one of these explorations that she found an ancient rune carved into a stone, something that her mother interpreted as a sign from the gods. This discovery marked the beginning of her quest for knowledge and strength, as she learned to wield a bow and arrow from her father during the day and to decipher the mysteries of the runes from her mother at night. By the age of 13, Freya was already known for her intelligence and skill. It was not uncommon to see her leading the children in games that simulated battles or exploring nearby caves, carrying with her a small necklace with a rune stone, her protective amulet. However, even amidst her infectious energy, she sensed that there was something greater in store for her, a destiny that she could not yet understand, but that called to her, silent and persistent, like the murmur of the wind in the mountains. Among the many stories Freya heard around the campfires, there was one that filled her eyes with a special glow, the legend of the Valkyries. It was said that these celestial warriors, chosen by the gods, rode through the sky on winged horses, deciding the fate of those who fell in battle. They chose the most valiant to take to Valhalla, the hall of warriors, where banquets and glory awaited them. For Freya, the Valkyries were not just characters. They were the reflection of strength, courage, and wisdom, everything she longed to be. One night, as the fire crackled and the flames danced in the icy wind, Freya asked the village school to tell her again the story of Brynhild, one of the most fearless Valkyries. The elder narrated how Brynhild faced the gods themselves in the name of justice, paying the price of being banished to the mortal world. Freya did not see this as a punishment, but as an act of unparalleled daring. Inspired, she began to imitate the Valkyries, creating small wooden figures that she carved in secret and using to dramatize miniature battles. Although Freya was still only 15 years old, her heart burned with the desire to become something beyond the ordinary. While the other girls in the village dreamed of parties and weddings, Freya trained in secret, carving runes into the tips of her arrows as offerings to the Valkyries. She believed, deep down, that one day the heavens would open a path for her, just as they did for those legendary heroines. But even in her dreams and fantasies, Freya sensed that the Valkyries held secrets that she had yet to discover. In the frozen lands of the north, where the wind howls like a warning of death, the name Hrothgar was enough to make even the bravest tremble. Called the Conqueror of Souls, he was not just a warrior, but a ruthless force who marched through villages with his army, spreading terror and destruction. Unlike other leaders who sought only plunder, Hrothgar had a cruel strategy. He captured the best warriors of each village, bending them to his will, while leaving behind only ashes and laments. Hrothgar was a man of colossal presence, with a scar across his face that seemed to tell the story of 1,000 battles. He believed that the strength of an army lay not in its numbers, but in the quality of its men. So his sharp eye assessed each warrior before capturing him. Those who resisted or showed themselves unworthy were mercilessly eliminated, their bodies left as a sinister warning to the survivors. His goal was clear: to build the most powerful army the North had ever seen, capable of dominating not only territory but also the spirit of any who dared to confront him. His strategies were not limited to brute force. Hrothgar used spies and saboteurs to destabilize villages before attacking, creating distrust among local leaders. On one occasion, he sent a captured warrior back to his village with a single message: "Submit or be ashes." The result was an immediate surrender, sparing his troops from direct confrontation. Despite being feared and hated, there was a strange respect for Hrothgar's military genius. Yet even he knew that his relentless march attracted forces that perhaps even his army could not contain. From the top of the hill, his eyes fixed on Freya's village, Hrothgar studied every detail like a predator before an attack. The glow of the torches and the muffled sound of conversation were signs of a community oblivious to the imminent danger. Beside him, his commanders waited in silence, attentive to instructions. Hrothgar knew that this village was no ordinary target. The disposition of the warriors, even from a distance, indicated that there might be talents here to add to his army. The invasion would have to be precise, swift, and devastating, for strength lay not only in domination, but in making it clear that resistance was futile. As the night wore on, he watched the men and women patrolling the village's outskirts. A faint smile appeared on his face when he noted the discipline and readiness of the warriors. "Interesting," he murmured, turning to his chief strategist. "Let's give them a chance to prove themselves." The orders began to be whispered, like a cold wind announcing the storm. Each detachment was assigned its task, one group to create distractions at the main entrance, another to surround the flanks, and a third, Hrothgar's elite, to capture the best fighters before they could organize an effective defense. The troop began to move like shadows among the trees, invisible to the unwary eye. Hrothgar stood at the center, coordinating everything with military precision. He knew that the success of his campaigns lay in his absolute control over every detail. As the siege tightened, he raised his hand, signaling the final pause before the attack. "By the time the first cry rings out," he said, "I want the village to be in our hands." There was something almost ritualistic about the moment, as if Hrothgar were once again drawing fate into his own hands. The silence of the early morning was shattered by the thunderous sound of the gates being broken open. The invasion began with a brutality that left Freya's village in shock. Hrothgar's warriors appeared like demons in the darkness, cutting through the chaos with sharp blades and relentless determination. Flames quickly consumed the wooden buildings, illuminating the terrified faces of the villagers. Freya, only 15 years old, watched the chaos alongside her father, who was already holding his sword and shield, ready to defend his family. He looked at her steadily, as if to engrave in her mind something she should never forget: courage in the face of death. In the midst of the chaos, Hrothgar emerged like a colossus, imposing in his armor, with an axe that seemed capable of splitting the very sky. He advanced with frightening calm, his eyes assessing each warrior as if choosing a diamond among ordinary stones. When his men encountered resistance, Hrothgar was the one who advanced, cutting down the defenders with cold, calculated efficiency. During the attack, he spotted Freya, standing in the middle of a narrow street, her eyes wide as she held a dagger more out of instinct than skill. Something in her expression made him pause for a moment, perhaps the fire in her eyes, so rare in the midst of despair. Hrothgar stepped forward, raising his axe with clear intent. It was then that Freya's father, like a bolt of lightning, stepped between them, raising his shield with a heavy hand. "Run, Freya!" he shouted, his voice drowned out by the roar of the flames and the screams around them. For a moment, she hesitated, but her father's eyes made it clear that there was no choice. Freya turned and ran, tears burning her cheeks as the sounds of battle faded away. The uneven forest floor hurt her feet, but she kept going, guided by pure survival instinct. When she finally stopped, breathless, amid the darkness and silence of the trees, Freya knew that her life would never be the same again. The sound of the horses' hooves reached Freya's ears with terrifying clarity. Her lungs burned as she ran, but panic drove her forward, never looking back. She knew she couldn't stop, couldn't be caught. The wind bit into her face, and deep in the forest, the shouts of the villagers and the din of battle seemed to fade away. But the horses were getting closer and closer, the unmistakable sound of an army determined to capture her. When the noise became unbearably loud, Freya glanced over her shoulder and saw the shadows of the horsemen cutting through the darkness of the forest, closer by the second. Freya's heart pounded in despair. She knew that if she were caught, her fate would be the same as everyone else's, a life of slavery or, worse, an ignoble death. Her feet felt heavy, the branches of the trees scraping against her body as she ran. But as the sound of the horses got closer, the pressure in her chest grew. The young woman knew that time was running out, and her only chance was to run faster, further. That was when, at the limit of her endurance, she heard a distant voice. Not a human voice, but something almost celestial, that seemed to echo through the trees. Suddenly, the wind changed and, from behind a curtain of mist, 3 powerful figures descended from the sky, riding their mounts like a flash of light in the darkness. The Valkyries, imposing and fierce, had arrived. Their armor shone with a power that made the air around them seem to vibrate. They advanced with supernatural speed, cutting through the air like sharp blades. The 5 knights chasing Freya had no time to react. Before they could raise their blades or adjust their mounts, the Valkyries attacked them with lethal precision. Each blow was deadly, each movement a reflection of the dexterity and divine power they possessed. In the blink of an eye, Hrothgar's 5 warriors were defeated, falling limp to the forest floor, while the Valkyries remained in position, relentless and vigilant. Freya, her heart racing, looked at those figures who had saved her life and, for the first time since the attack, felt a spark of hope. Freya was still in shock, her mind trying to process everything that had happened that night. The bodies of the fallen warriors now lay at her feet, but what struck her most was the presence of the Valkyries. They were so different from anything she had ever known, so powerful, yet at the same time, there was a serenity in their gestures that made them almost mystical. One of them, the youngest and with hair as golden as the sun, dismounted from her horse and walked towards Freya with firm but gentle steps. She knelt before the young Viking, her sky-blue eyes reflecting a deep wisdom far beyond Freya's years. "You are safe now," the Valkyrie said, her voice soft but full of authority. "Do not fear, Freya. It is no coincidence that we are here. You carry something within you, something that many do not see. What you found in the forest, that rune, it is a clear sign. You have been chosen." Freya, still panting, could not fully understand, but the Valkyrie's gaze left no room for doubt. "This rune," the Valkyrie continued, "is a symbol of great power. It means that you are destined to be one of us, the peacemaker of the island, the protector of your brothers and sisters, who will bring balance and strength to this place." Freya, her heart pounding in her chest, finally took a deep breath and looked at the rune in her hand. It was a mark she had never seen before. But as she looked more closely, something inside her lit up. It was as if that symbol had always been there, just waiting to be discovered. The Valkyrie slowly stood up, and the other 2 warriors followed her. "Come with us," the Valkyrie said, extending her hand. "The island needs you, and your destiny goes beyond the borders of what you imagined. Prepare yourself, Freya. The path will be hard, but you are no longer alone." Freya looked up at the sky, still filled with stars, and without a second thought, grabbed the Valkyrie's hand. Together, They mounted their horses and began riding into the unknown, where Freya's true journey would begin. Freya was lost in a whirlwind of emotions as she rode alongside the three Valkyries. The journey seemed to take forever, and the words the eldest Valkyrie had spoken to her still echoed in her mind. "You have been chosen." When they finally arrived at the Valkyrie house, Freya did not know what to expect. The place was immense, with high stone walls surrounded by a dense forest. The air was thick with magic, and the weight of history seemed to be felt with every step. The Valkyries led her inside, where a large fireplace was burning, warming the rustic and cozy atmosphere. However, despite the security around her, Freya could not hold back her tears. Sitting near the fire, she collapsed in a sea of sadness. The pain of the loss of her village, her father's sacrifice, and the uncertainty about her future were overwhelming her in ways she had never imagined. One of the Valkyries, the most experienced, approached and, with a gentle gesture, touched the young woman's shoulder. "Cry, Freya," she said tenderly. "Release your pain. Here you can be vulnerable. But remember, after tears comes strength. What you carry is far greater than any tragedy." Freya felt, for the first time in weeks, comfortable crying without fear of being judged, without feeling that her weakness would be seen as a failure. After a few days, Freya felt stronger, but she still doubted her ability to live the fate that was being imposed on her. On the morning of the 7th day, the Valkyries began to train her, with the first lesson being about controlling her mind and soul. They taught her to breathe deeply, to focus her thoughts, and to control the strength she felt within herself. "You are the guardian of balance," the youngest Valkyrie would say. "To be a Valkyrie, you must learn to master your energy, not only with your body, but also with your mind. Only when you learn to calm your spirit will you be able to wield the sword of truth." The training was arduous, but Freya, with a renewed heart and a clearer mind, began to realize an inner strength she had never known she possessed. It was as if the weight of her destiny began to transform into something greater. The future was, indeed, in her hands. The 3 years that followed were intense and transformative. Freya, a young woman with a gentle heart and a troubled spirit, went from being a simple villager, marked by loss and fear, to a fearless and disciplined warrior. The training was constant, without rest, but over time, Freya began to understand the great responsibility she carried, the purpose that had called her to be a Valkyrie. Each day was a new opportunity to overcome, and the young warrior threw herself into the process with a strength she herself did not know she possessed. In the first few months, she was taught to control her body and mind. The Valkyries knew that Freya's greatest challenge would be to align her emotions with her strength, as she was guided by a desire for revenge and justice. But she needed to learn to use these feelings wisely. The physical training involved rigorous combat techniques, which ranged from swordsmanship to mastery of the bow and arrow. Freya was known for her agility and precision, but more importantly, she learned to control the fear, anger, and hatred that sometimes threatened to boil over. Every blow she struck, every move she made, was accompanied by deep reflections on what it meant to be a protector, not just for her village, but for the entire island. But Freya's true mastery did not come from physical training alone. The Valkyries knew that to be truly powerful, they needed wisdom beyond brute strength. So Freya spent long hours studying the ancient sacred texts of the Valkyries, which spoke of the laws of fate, the forces that governed life and death, and the balance between good and evil. She was taught to see the world not only with her eyes, but with her heart and mind. The Valkyries, in their wisdom, understood that Freya needed to learn to be a strategist, to understand the complexities of human relationships, to have vision beyond the battle. During this time, she learned to think, not just react, something that would prove crucial when faced with enemies that went far beyond mere strength. As Freya matured, she became more than a warrior. She became a symbol, a Valkyrie who represented the hope, redemption, and strength of the people of her island. Her skill with the sword was undeniable, but her mind had become even sharper. She knew that the real battle she faced would not be against her enemies, but against destiny itself, against the need to shape the future, not simply accept it. During these 3 years, Freya had to face her own fears and traumas, working with the more experienced Valkyries to understand what it truly meant to be a protector of the people. As the oracle had said, she was the key to bringing peace to the island. Now, she understood deeply that her mission was not just to spill blood, but to restore peace, to save the innocent, and to break the cycle of violence that had taken hold of the land. As the 3rd year came to an end, the Valkyries realized that Freya was ready. She had become an unbeatable warrior and leader, with the wisdom, strength, and determination that any Valkyrie should have. One night, during intensive training, the 3 eldest Valkyries called her to the central room of the Valkyrie house, where the fire in the great fireplace illuminated their serious faces. "The time has come, Freya," said the most experienced Valkyrie, her voice deep and calm. "You are ready to face the real battle, to fulfill the destiny that has been given to you. The mission begins now." Freya looked into the eyes of the Valkyries, feeling the weight of their words. She knew that she was no longer on a path of revenge, but of something much greater. She was the hope of the island. With her spirit renewed, she equipped herself with her sword and prepared herself for the most important mission of her life. She knew that she would face not only physical enemies, but also the challenges that would come from the very heart of her homeland. Her purpose was before her, and she knew that whatever the challenge, she was ready to overcome it. During the 3 years that Freya was trained by the Valkyries, the island she had come to know so fondly was in constant tension. The impact of the actions of Hrothgar, the ruthless conqueror, spread like a dark pall, covering the once prosperous lands. He was not content with the villages he had sacked. Over time, Hrothgar conquered lands, enslaved the populations, and forged a fearsome and unbeatable army, his power growing with each victorious battle. But his true goal was always more ambitious than simple domination. He wanted the entire island. Hrothgar's great castle, known as the Iron Keep, stood imposingly in the heart of the island. Its dark stone walls and iron towers stood out against the skyline, a symbol of the absolute dominion he sought. The keep was more than just a military stronghold. It was the nerve center of his empire, where he planned every attack, every move. Guarded by hordes of fierce warriors and commanded by trusted advisors, the fortress became more impregnable with each passing day. Its power was not limited to the territory it dominated, but expanded into the minds of its enemies, terrifying those who dared to challenge it. Meanwhile, the villagers and warriors of the island, terrified by Hrothgar's strength, felt the weight of an uncertain future. Some fled to the mountains, others hid in the forests, but few had the courage to openly resist. Villages fell one after another, and with it, Hrothgar's domain expanded even further. He used his psychological tactics, striking unexpectedly and making the enemy fear what was to come. His army, a great amalgam of desolate and forced warriors, became increasingly lethal, and his castle, now well established, was a place where death and fear breathed through every corridor. Yet, far from this growing shadow, Freya and the Valkyries continued to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. Word of Hrothgar's rise had reached them, but Freya's youth and strength were being formed for a much greater purpose. She sensed that her training would not be in vain, that at some point, the light of resistance would shine against the darkness that was gathering over the island. And that moment was not far off. Freya, now on her way, knew that the battle to pacify the island would not be easy. But she would not allow herself to be consumed by the thirst for revenge. On the contrary, her goal was deeper, to bring the peace that the island so desperately needed, even if it meant facing Hrothgar. She felt in her heart that in order to restore harmony, she must first weaken the tyrant who was plaguing the lands. Her mission began there, with the first village that had been taken by Hrothgar's forces. When she reached the village, the scene was devastating. The houses were in ruins. The land that was once fertile was now stained with the blood of fallen warriors. The people were submissive, cornered, with few who still kept the flame of hope alive. Freya knew that peace would not begin with fighting, but with a symbolic act. Using her skills, she infiltrated the enemy lines, defeating the patrols with the precision of a seasoned warrior. Her movements were swift and sure, and within moments, the village was freed from the clutches of Hrothgar's forces. With the territory liberated, Freya headed to the central square, where the relieved population had gathered, but still with distrust in their eyes. With firmness, Freya approached a surviving soldier from Hrothgar's forces and ordered him to go to the other villages. "Get up and run to the others. Tell them that peace is coming. Tell them that, although the fight was difficult, the future of the island will be restored," Freya said, her voice firm and full of hope. The soldier, reluctant at first, finally understood the message that Freya carried in her heart. He set off on horseback, determined to spread the message of resistance and freedom throughout the island, starting with the nearest village. With her mission accomplished, Freya looked out over the horizon, with the weight of responsibility now on her shoulders. She knew that this was only the beginning. The path would be long and arduous, and she would have to face forces much greater than herself. However, a flame of hope had been rekindled in the villages, and Freya was ready to move forward, knowing that her journey was only just beginning. After a month of intense battles, Freya had already freed several villages from Hrothgar's clutches. She had become a living legend, a well-known and respected figure whose deeds spread throughout the lands of the island. Each village she visited left behind a relieved people, with renewed hope, but the fight was not easy. In each confrontation, she faced relentless forces, Hrothgar's warriors who fought to the last breath. But Freya, with her Valkyrie training, was unbeatable. With each victory, more villages joined her cause. However, as Freya advanced, an echo of arrogance reached Hrothgar's ears. He had heard of her deeds, of the villages she had liberated, and of the strength with which she was becoming a symbol of resistance. But instead of worrying, Hrothgar felt even more confident. "She is just a girl, a shadow of what I am," he told himself, laughing at the idea that someone could put an end to his rule. His empire was growing ever larger, and he believed that no one would be able to challenge him. The idea of being defeated by Freya was absurd, and his arrogance blinded him to the true threat she posed. It was then that, in one of the last confrontations, Freya obtained a crucial clue. During an ambush, one of the captured soldiers revealed, with fear in his eyes, that Hrothgar was concentrating his forces in the legendary castle of Karhold, an imposing fortress located on a mountain to the north. This information lit a fire within Freya. She knew that she would face the antagonist at some point, and now he was within her reach. However, before setting out for the final battle, she felt that she would need something more: wisdom. An ancient wisdom, something that ordinary humans did not possess, something that the Valkyries could perhaps provide. Freya decided to head to Mount Norn, the legendary place where the Norns, the Weavers of Fate, lived. They were believed to have the power to grant answers, to reveal paths that mortals could not see. The journey to the mountain would not be easy. But she knew that this encounter could give her the knowledge she needed to finally defeat Hrothgar and pacify the island. Along the way, the icy winds of the north began to blow stronger, as if fate itself were challenging her. But Freya did not hesitate. The silence of the mountains seemed to call to her, and she felt deep inside that, upon reaching it, answers awaited her. Freya finally reached Mount Norn, where the bitter wind seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The air was cold and thick, as if time itself had bowed to the presence of the Norns. The rocks around her glowed with something mystical, something beyond mortal comprehension. As she entered the temple of the Norns, a sense of awe and power enveloped her. The place was like an ancient shrine, where the currents of fate seemed to flow visibly, woven by unseen hands. In the center of the temple, the Norns waited, in a silence that was at once disconcerting and powerful. 3 towering figures, their eyes seeming to reflect the universe itself, gazed at Freya with a wisdom that transcended all human understanding. Freya's fate, like that of all living things, was entwined with the invisible thread of life and death, and they knew exactly what she sought. As she approached, Freya felt a chill run down her spine, for she knew that the moment that was approaching would bring answers, but also something that could change everything forever. "Are you ready to hear your destiny?" the first Norn asked, her voice echoing in the temple. The other Norn, with an enigmatic smile, simply watched, as if words were unnecessary. Freya, with her heart racing, nodded, but her mind was full of questions. "Do you wish to know how to defeat your enemy? Or would you rather understand your role in the great cycle of life?" the third Norn asked. The silence stretched for a few seconds, and Freya realized that her answer would lead her down a path of no return. She finally spoke, her voice firm but full of respect. "I wish to know how to defeat Hrothgar and save my land." The Norns exchanged a silent look, and then one of them raised her hands, murmuring ancient and powerful words. The air around Freya began to vibrate, as if something were being shaped, something beyond the reach of human vision. Freya's fate was being sealed in that moment. With a gentle movement, one of the Norns touched her forehead, and a ripple of energy coursed through her body. Freya felt a deep connection to the very fabric of reality. She knew then that the battle ahead would be more than just a physical war. It would be a fight against the forces that govern the fate of all. But she also felt a renewed strength within her. Something new, something that would guide her in her hour of need. The Norns, with their silent gazes, gave Freya their blessing. "You carry within you the power to change the course of history. But remember, girl, that true power lies not in your hands, but in what you choose to do with it," one of them said, her words reverberating deep within Freya's soul. "This is the destiny you have been given," another added. And with a final gesture, the third Norn caused a golden light to envelop Freya, filling her with an ancient strength, the same that the Valkyries carried, capable of destroying any enemy that crossed her path. Freya, now with a sense of great destiny, thanked the Norns. She knew that her journey was at a critical point. As she turned to leave, she felt that the weather had changed. The mountains seemed quieter, and despite the weight of what she had just learned, Freya knew that she was ready for the next step. The attack against Hrothgar and his empire was about to begin, and she would prepare with all the strength of a Valkyrie. Her heart was firm, and the blessing of the Norns would guide her to final victory. The night before the attack on Hrothgar's castle was cold and silent, with the sky covered in thick clouds that seemed to weigh down the land. Freya stood in an open field, gazing at the imposing walls of the castle, which rose like dark giants before her. In the distance, the lights of the lit towers flickered like eyes watching the horizon. She knew that this would be the decisive moment, the final battle that would define the fate of the island and all who lived there. Her spirit was calm, but the weight of responsibility still weighed it down. She did not seek revenge, but she knew that, to ensure peace, victory over Hrothgar was inevitable. With the blessing of the Norns, Freya felt within her a power that transcended the physical. She wielded her blade masterfully, the gleaming iron reflecting the light of a moon that was now timidly emerging between the clouds. At her side, the Valkyries stood ready, their armor silver and their eyes burning with determination. The attack was precisely coordinated, and Hrothgar's soldiers, who were patrolling the surroundings, soon noticed the presence of Freya and her army. It wasn't long before the castle gates opened, and the first enemy warriors advanced against her. But Freya didn't hesitate, her sword cutting through the air with agility, cutting down enemies with deadly precision. The battle intensified as Freya and her army approached the castle. Hrothgar's forces were well prepared, but they were powerless against the power of the Valkyries. Freya's every move was like a reflection of her soul, for she was connected to something much greater than a simple war. Swords clashed with thunderous sounds, and the flames of the fires illuminated the battlefield. But Freya did not take her eyes off her goal. The castle, now in full swing, would be the final stage of her journey. She knew that her confrontation with Hrothgar was inevitable, and this thought motivated her to fight with even more fervor. When she finally reached the foot of the great tower, Hrothgar appeared before her, imposing and filled with visceral hatred. His eyes, like two abyssal windows to hell, fixed on Freya with the fury of a man who knew that his last stand was there. He advanced, the heavy axe in his hands, but Freya did not retreat. She knew her mission, and she knew that this would be the moment to prove to everyone that peace would be more powerful than war. The battle between them was fierce. Hrothgar, with his brute strength, tried to crush Freya, but she moved with grace and precision, dodging and attacking with calculated force. During the confrontation, Freya felt the power of the Valkyries running through her veins, and the strength of the Norns seemed to guide her in each blow. Finally, with a fierce scream, Freya disarmed Hrothgar and threw him to the ground, the blade of her sword reflecting the light of victory. Hrothgar was defeated. The villain who had caused so much suffering now lay at Freya's feet, and the island breathed a sigh of relief. Freya did not kill him, for her goal was not to destroy, but to liberate. She handed him over to her own men, who would take him into exile far from the island. The war was over, and with Hrothgar's fall, the peace that Freya had sought for so long would finally be established. The enemy forces dissipated, like leaves in the wind, and the villages would finally be free. Freya looked to the horizon, to the mountains that surrounded the island, and knew, in that moment, that her destiny was fulfilled. She had saved her land and ensured peace, but more than that, she had shown everyone that true strength does not lie in brute force, but in courage, heart, and the wisdom to fight for a greater good. The Valkyries were at her side, and the people revered her as a leader who, in addition to being a warrior, was the gateway to a new era. The battle against Hrothgar was the end of a dark era, but the beginning of an era of peace, prosperity, and wisdom for all who inhabited the island. And so, the story of Freya, the Chosen One, spread throughout the lands, a legend that would be told for generations, immortalized in the hearts of all. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.